So there's been a number of developments in the Tara Reade sexual assault allegation, which we've been following on this channel. So here to talk about this and here to break it down with me, I got Chris Frederick from Political Perspective. We're going to be talking about the ins and outs of this whole thing. So Chris, you want to kick it off? Kick it off for us?
Sure. So, as most people know now, we're looking at a situation where Tara Reade, uh, who worked for Joe Biden in the 90s, came forward and has made sexual allegations against him, which appear to be credible allegations. So they definitely are worth looking at and saying, okay, this is something people need to pay attention to. And just kind of looking at the whole mess around that, there's so much involved in this between, just even if it wasn't part of politics, um, the whole women being assaulted issue, but then there's political ramifications of all this, and then how the media has handled it. And I guess part of me is just sort of amazed that we're even in this position, what, a year or 2 years after the Me Too movement, that we're now looking at the two real choices that it looks like you're going to have to vote for president. Both have credible sexual assault allegations against them, and it I guess it bothers me. I mean, we know with the DNC they have a lot of pull with and there's lots of complaints about Biden getting the nomination, but the truth is people were voting for Biden. Like, this is how we ended up with this choice of Biden is there was a big movement of people who voted for Biden, and we're now in this position where it's like both of the people that you can vote for really just kind of disgusting choices.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly embarrassing. I mean, to think, I mean, of course, obviously, Donald Trump has way more allegations against him, although there's all those incredibly creepy videos of Joe Biden that we don't have of Donald
Yeah.
Trump necessarily. But regardless, I guess the question or the thing that I've been maybe thinking about is whether or not the Me Too movement died before Joe Biden or whether or not it died because of Joe Biden, right? Like, some people seem to think that it's because of the fact that Joe Biden got in and now the Democrats are completely spineless, and to some extent, like, I'm very sympathetic to that approach, that like the Democrats are just completely spineless. They just want to get into office, and they're willing to sacrifice any kind of credibility which they may have had on the Me Too movement to get that win. And then there's also this other approach which seems to suggest that maybe the Me Too movement died before Joe Biden, specifically possibly even partially because of Donald Trump. The thing that I think about is, the whole thing with Justin Fairfax and Ralph Northam. So I'm from Virginia, and about a year ago, Ralph Northam got in big trouble because he had this picture basically from his yearbook in which he was in blackface. And then shortly after that, Justin Fairfax, the lieutenant governor of Virginia, was accused of a sexual assault slash rape allegation against someone who when he was in school at Duke. And Justin Fairfax had immediate calls for him to step down. Ralph Northam was getting calls for him to step down. But ironically, it was almost the fact that that Justin Fairfax was accused of rape and sexual assault was one of the main reasons why Ralph Northam was even able to stay in office, because it meant that there was a possibility that Republicans were going to start to take over, and suddenly Democrats back down from calls to push him out. And the other thing when it comes to this is that, um, well, actually, first, I don't want to just like keep going on. What do you have a response to that, or like?
Yeah, so basically about the Democrats not being tough enough or standing up, is that's
Well,
kind of where you were
I mean,
going?
it seems like the Me Too movement might have died before then, right? Because I mean, you look at, for instance, like Al
Yeah,
Franken or something like that. There actually was a lot
right.
of pushback among the Democratic base for that, saying that actually, you pushed him out too soon, you were too aggressive, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And so it's possible that the Me Too movement was already dead, and the politicians were already like, oh, maybe we pushed it too far. And there's a debate whether or not whether or not their hypocrisy is explicitly related to Joe Biden, or whether or not their hypocrisy is related to they actually at least partially changed their mind before Joe
Right.
Biden.
Yeah, because it seems to me like it maybe the actual movement maybe died down a while ago, because there was a while there where it was like every morning in the shower on the radio I'm hearing about the next development in the who's been named today, and all these people getting named for stuff. And it seems like you haven't heard that for quite a while, right? And I guess you would hope that there would be a lasting impression. We all went through the Me Too movement. You would hope there would be this lasting awareness where we realize, oh, we're living in a different world than we did in the 60s, right? Women are treated differently, or you would hope the ideal is that women are treated differently in 2020 than they were in
Yeah.
1960. But it kind of seems, like the stuff with Joe Biden just makes me kind of wonder, like, how did we get here? How did we get to this point where it was somehow acceptable? Like you were saying, we ran Al Franken out, or they ran Al Franken out, um, on what a lot of people were pushing back on, and yet somehow this very credible allegation with Biden, people are almost trying to cover it up. People are trying to say it shouldn't even be part of the discussion because you're going to cost Biden votes, and it's like, well, we need to be voting on people based on the truth, right?
Right.
We need to know the whole story as much as possible. So I would hope that the Me Too movement still had some effects, but it's kind of the same thing where, like, how much is this kind of stuff still happening in society? Probably a lot, because we now have two presidential candidates that both have credible allegations against them.
But I guess one of the things that's like kind of interesting when it comes to this Joe Biden thing is there was also that story of a 14-year-old girl who was, or I should say 14 at the time, who is claiming that Joe Biden complimented the size of her breasts, when she was literally 14 years old. Um, and there's multiple corroborating sources. One person even claiming that she saw it happen. Someone who was like ran for Delaware Senate multiple times is saying that she even like witnessed this. And so I think there's something like 7 or maybe even 8 people saying that they were told at the time about this. And so it's an interesting case, but then the response from the Biden campaign was more or less just to release supposed evidence that he wasn't there. Now, the actual evidence is questionable because she was saying that she was like, that Joe Biden was on his way to an event, and Biden says the response that they released was, well, Biden actually wasn't at this particular event that she says that he was going to. So, I mean, it's not entirely clear that entirely refutes it. Like she could have had, not been entirely sure where he was going, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but I mean, and Ryan Grimm made this point on Twitter, which is that this poses the possibility, like this presents the possibility of completely destroying the idea of the Me Too movement, because the idea of the Me Too movement was that if you had kind of corroborating people, like people were able to vouch for you in a sense, that then you could be trusted, and that was the sort of level of standard that was required for these new sorts of allegations, right? We're trying to invent socially a new way of handling different sorts of allegations, because it became clear to individuals that the traditional way of dealing with sort of criminal justice wasn't adequate for dealing with issues of sexual assault and abuse and these deeply personal issues
Right.
that can happen in domestic affairs. But if the standard just becomes, well, okay, pics or it didn't happen, then, or video, et cetera, then we're just back to where we were, right? Because if
Yeah.
Biden can just refute this and say, well, okay, it turns out that, you were making this up, that the fact that, oh, well, you had all these corroborating witnesses is irrelevant. I mean, it seems like then the Me Too movement is just, we didn't make any progress for women. And that's outrageous, it would seem.
Yeah, it's a messy situation because just from the nature of it, I mean, you're generally not going to have, proof, right? Like that you would want in a court of law. You're frequently not going to have proof, especially when it comes out at a later date. So it is this very difficult thing of what is the level at which um, something becomes credible. And it was disappointing to see. I just watched the DNC chair on an interview the other day, and he basically took the
Mm-hmm.
approach that you would expect someone to be taking, years ago, where they basically were just obviously trying to steamroll it, trying to push it under the rug, and not really taking it seriously and saying, well, here's this woman with this story, and the facts more, seem to be lining up. It seems to be credible. There are a number of people coming forward and saying that, yes, she talked about this. This isn't something that was just made up in the last 6 months. I think that was a big part of the Me Too movement, was going, okay, sure, you could argue that it's all circumstantial evidence, but it seems to be a lot of circumstantial evidence that does seem to support this allegation that was made. We should take a serious look at it. We
Right.
should take it seriously.
Well, I mean, the idea, of course, is that different types of things qualify as proof for this sort of affair as opposed to, criminal
Right.
affairs, etc. And I
Right.
mean, in the case of Tom Perez, what you're mentioning there, he compared it to Hillary's emails. He said, "Oh, well, this is just
Right.
Hillary's email scandal all the way," which, by the way, completely oblivious to the fact that, in many respects, that probably was the thing that sunk her campaign. So like you can blather
Hmm.
on all you want all day about how unfair it was. Well, it still cost you the election, so maybe you should take a lesson from that and and learn a little bit. Um, yeah, and so, the thing though that I'm kind of wondering about is this whole idea of playing hardball, right? Like it seems like the lesson which a lot of Democrats took from the Trump era is that, oh, well, we have to play hardball in order to beat him, right? Fight fire with fire. So the lesson was that Donald Trump won and Donald Trump was able to steamroll all of these sexual assault allegations by just playing hardball. And it seems like Democrats are just copying Donald Trump in a sense.
Yeah.
And that's particularly scary for me. I mean, I was talking about Ralph Northam and Justin Fairfax earlier. I mean, in the case of Ralph Northam, he just refused to step down. I mean, he had every single person in Virginia basically calling on him to step down. Everybody was like, "You need to step down. You need to step down." All the delegates, everybody. But then now they're happy to, take photos and vote with him, et cetera, et cetera. Because at the end of the day, they were like, "Oh, like I actually still have to like get things passed if I want to stay in office myself." And so it seems now, I mean, there's obviously a chicken and the egg debate, like whether or not it was Donald Trump or whether actually I suppose this isn't chicken or the egg technically, but like whether or not it was Donald Trump or whether or not this was caused by some broader issue like polarization. And so now, in the same way that voters feel trapped between lesser of two evils, in the same way that now politicians also feel trapped in that same in that same way. And that's just a scary thing. That's just a scary thing.
Yeah, and on the issue of playing hardball, I find it a difficult balance sometimes because it's like on one hand the Republicans do keep winning because they play hardball. They're not when something goes wrong, they're not afraid. They'll tough it out like you were saying. There's calls to stand down, they won't do it. They'll just keep doing their thing, and that erosion on that side is one of the reasons why I'm so against that Republican Party is because they're breaking things down and destroying things. Yet at the same time, they keep winning. They keep winning in the ways that they
Right.
need to in order to be successful. So you don't want to be on one side and be the team that has the like you can stand on your high ground and say, yeah, we're doing everything right, but then you just keep losing and the country sort of lags behind. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to know what to do with what level of hardball is the appropriate one to play, and especially in a situation where if this was clear cut, you know, uh, what am I trying to say here? So in the type of situation we're talking about, which is a sexual allegation type situation, it's just so messy just by the very nature of it, right? You have people that um,
Yeah.
they're gonna try to twist their brain in order to come to the conclusion that they already wanted to arrive at, which is that you either like Biden or you don't, and so you're trying to come up with a way to excuse that rather than looking at it and saying, there's a pretty
Yeah.
credible allegation here that looks like it certainly deserves to be looked at.
And actually, the other thing that that I'm just thinking as you're saying that, there seems to be two ways in which the concept of playing hardball is used, right? So I'm not sure that it's entirely the level of hardball. Like just as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking to myself, it seems like there's two ways in which the word is used. The first is kind of a Machiavellian sense where it's just like you do anything for the sake of power. Morals are just, a form of decorum. You pretend to be religious. In the case of Machiavelli, he's arguing, well, you pretend to be religious, and then use it entirely cynically for your own ends. And then the second form of playing hardball is this idea that we just stand with our principles and we don't bow to power, right? So, you have your principles, you have the things that you believe in, and you refuse to bend, and that's what it means to play hardball. And it oftentimes seems like, I think that not only is that just like a linguistic lack of distinction, it also seems to be just like a conceptual one where I
Hmm.
oftentimes see in my own comment section people talking about the need to play hardball, and the model that they use is Donald Trump. But then what they mean by hardball is that, well, we need to just stick by our principles and refuse to bow to corporations in any instance, not realizing that in many respects these are precisely opposite usages of the same term, of the same concept, which is that on one hand they're saying, well, everything is cynical, everything is just a power play, and then on the other hand they're saying everything is a principle stand, that just was
Hmm.
what is power. That, like, I mean, something that I've always expressed is that power cannot be held independent of some sort of ideology. Like, I mean, even in the case of Machiavelli, like he thinks, for instance, that it's possible to cynically use religion to, express any kind of power grab that you possibly want, not realizing though that that ideology of religion does narrow down the things which are possible for you to cynically do. So it seems to me that like any instance of power is always an ideological sort of an ideological usage. So I guess I would lean on this on the second form of formulation of playing hardball. I guess. Is there anything to that, or is that just
Yeah, I mean, I guess you're right. There's a bit of a distinction, but they somewhat go hand in hand. And it seems like on the left, they could definitely use more of that actual, like the practical version of hardball. Of course, you have to stand for something and you have to mean something, but you can see in the round of bailouts that just went through, I mean, the Republicans got a ton of stuff they wanted, and the Democrats got very little, and they were sort of waiting for, oh, they're going to take care of us in the next bailout, which now it sounds like Mitch McConnell saying, I don't know if we even need any more bailouts. So it was that inability to play hardball during all of that, which just left the left basically getting nothing and the Republicans getting everything.
Well, that might have just been over eagerness to compromise, like this idea that you can just be like pragmatic, independent of like having any kind of belief that you actually believe in. The example that I was thinking of, as I guess as I was saying it was, you think back to as the Democrats more or less sold out unions in order to ship jobs overseas, and now you're in a situation where because of the fact that the white working class is shifting over to the Republicans, because of the fact that it was always union white working class who supported Democrats, that those groups are now union groups, as they become smaller and smaller. Now you're in a situation where the Democrats feel like they need to, in order to keep winning, bring in voters from the upper middle class suburbs, the Karens of the world, et cetera, et cetera. You need to bring those people into the party, and that, oh well, we need a big tent party now, and what that means is that you bring in rich people, bring in millionaires, billionaires, et cetera, et cetera, not realizing that by doing that you're undermining your very own legitimacy, right? So there's this idea that, oh well, it was possible for me to just play power, for me to just do the thing that was in my best strategic interest, but then you inevitably end up regressing on the very things that you say you believe, and then that kind of cynicism, right? People then start to perceive you as a cynical actor. People polarize, and then it doesn't seem like, I mean, it seems like you erode the very support which you had in the first case. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, and then there's the question of, well, how far do you go, right? There's sort of the mainstream people on the left that, and then you have the more extreme people, or what seems to be more extreme people like me, who, yeah, I want to see all those unions come back, right? I would like to see the unions the way it used to be, where it was much more common for people to be in unions. But it seems like there's maybe this middle ground of people that consider themselves Democrats and vote Democrat, which I don't know how. Like, they're maybe just extremely moderate, where it's like they're not that far to the left of being
Well, a lot of them,
Republicans.
I mean, a lot of them though, they just really care about the decorum of it, the look of it, right? I mean, I think that in many respects is probably
Yeah.
why they prefer the Machiavellian approach, right? You pretend to be religious, but then you just do whatever you want for cynical play, right? I mean, I don't know. We saw. I mean, I know at this point we're kind of tangenting a little bit here, but I mean, we saw, for instance, the George W. Bush whole clip controversy blow up on Twitter, where everybody was freaking out over the fact that George W. Bush put out, so George W. Bush put out like this, sort of ad that everybody, or at least all the libs out there, love. They were just like, oh my gosh, gushing over this thing, how George W. Bush is, a better president than Donald Trump. And then of course the left was just attacking them like, look here, you're just all of a sudden happy over George W. Bush when look at all the war crimes that he's committed. I mean, it seems to be that same kind of decorum, and we're seeing it with Tara Reade, right? We're seeing it with Tara Reade.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's hard to know what to make of it. We seem to be in this situation now where every time someone does something, you either have to attack that person or love the person, right? There's no distinction of like, this point that George Bush is, and I actually didn't even see what George Bush actually said, but I saw that it was in the news being talked about. But it's one thing to say that the comment being made right now in this moment is a legitimate comment, even if that person has a background that is less than desirable.
Yeah, so before I saw anything about it, that was kind of my view too. But then when I watched it, I realized, oh, these people aren't actually because George W. Bush didn't say anything in that ad. It was just the libs praising the decorum of it. They're like, oh, look how presidential he looks. He's really taking on the role of a
Oh,
manager of the economy. Like, such a neoliberal, such a neoliberal attitude to it. I mean, if George W. Bush came out with like a policy solution that actually uh, was going to solve the issue of coronavirus. Like, I'm not opposed to like using an idea just because it came from someone who you despise if the idea, independent of anything else, is good. Like, is George W.
right.
Bush a war criminal? Yeah, absolutely, of course. Like, you can't deny that stuff, right? But like, if he actually had an idea, that's one thing. But in the case of this ad, he's just talking about how, oh, we need to come together, like blah blah blah. Like there wasn't any substance to this particular ad. But
Oh,
anyway,
yeah.
anyway, yeah. Anything else you want to close out with Tara Reade? Because definitely we've drifted in this conversation.
Um, I wonder how it's going to go going forward because it looks like Biden is going to be the nominee. So right now it's getting a little bit of heat in the news, but what I wonder is what it's going to be like in October, right, leading up to the election, because the Republicans aren't just going to sit around and watch this happen, and it's I read an article the other day that this is somewhat showing up even more on Fox News and those kind of channels. But I mean, Trump's just going to be talking about it in October. I mean, it's going to just like the emails were such a big thing before 4 years ago. I mean, this could be the kind of thing that if there were rallies, which there probably won't be any
Mm-hmm.
rallies, but if there were, they would be chanting something about lock Biden up for this kind of stuff. So I
Well,
think people need to look at the whole picture of how this could play out for the whole. And I'm
yeah.
not saying don't. I want to be clear here. I'm not saying don't bring it up because it could hurt him. I'm saying we need to get all this talked out and get to the bottom of it so we can figure out what to do
Yeah, a
going
hundred
forward.
percent. I think the media actually did a disservice to Biden. Like, if they were trying to help Biden, I think it did the opposite by completely ignoring this. Because if they had covered it, especially early on when Bernie was still in the race, like this could have been decided. Like people could have
Yeah.
come to their own positions, figured out how they felt about it, et cetera, et cetera. But then by covering it up and hiding it, now all of a sudden, there's all these polls out suggesting that a lot of people want to see Biden replaced. Now, to be fair, some of that is like we don't have polls of previous presumptive nominees before they clinch the nomination, so we don't actually know. So you can look at that and say like 40% of people under 45 want to get rid of Joe Biden on account of these allegations, but we don't know what the results were compared to other Dem nominees, to be fair. um, but I mean, still, I mean, still, like you're in a situation where I mean, it's definitely not an enviable situation. I'll put it that
Right.
way. Put it that way.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. It's gonna get messy. Yeah.
get messy. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and I will have down in the comment or down in the description, I will have a link to your YouTube channel, link to your Twitter, if you're chill with that, and
Yeah.
see you guys next time.
All right. Thanks a lot.